Thank you for joining the MillerKnoll Design Perspectives. I am Alan Almasy, and today on Design Perspectives, our guest is Joseph White. Joseph is the Director of Design Strategy with MillerKnoll, and in keeping with Design Perspectives, where we talk about all things design, Joseph is going to be sharing some of MillerKnoll's thinking, research, and insights around where the future of work is going. And so I'll turn it over to Joseph in a moment, but we'll let you know that Joseph will share our thinking with you for about 45 minutes, and then we will keep about 15 minutes at the end for all of you to ask your questions. And we encourage you to use the chat field to enter your questions. So Joseph, without further ado, welcome to Design Perspectives.
Thank you so much, Alan, and thank you everyone for sharing some of your time today. I'm very excited to share this information with you. I can say with a lot of humility and pride at the same time that this is stemming from some of the best work I've been able to do in my career, and that's really looking at how the legacies of Herman Miller and Knoll sit side by side, complement each other, and form a new foundation from which we will look forward to shape our insights, shape our understanding, guide our research in terms of how we come together to create places that matter for people. So today is part one of a part two discussion. There will be another session that happens in January that builds on this same content. So today I'm going to go through, share some information, and focus most on some of the implications that we see for place design right now. The January session will build on some of the same ideas here, but talk more about how we're going to use them to structure our forward-looking research agenda. So without further ado, let's dive in. Alan, can you still hear me? My computer seems to have frozen on this end.
I can hear you. Yep.
Great. I have
And we're
completely
looking at
lost
the
control of the
MillerKnoll
presentation.
slide that says Designing a Better Tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Unreal.
Your face is frozen, though, on the screen.
Yeah, okay, wait. All right, I think I'm back.
Okay, yeah, your head is moving again, so
Okay.
we hear
All
you
right, here
loud
we
and
go.
clear. So
Good.
and
All
we're
right,
on
fingers
slide
crossed
two,
it
so
doesn't
that's
freeze again.
yeah,
So
fingers crossed.
and this is something that we all know. Laptops and Wi-Fi really untethered workers from the office years ago, but it took a global pandemic to spark widespread acceptance of distributed work. We've learned a lot of lessons over the last 2 years that really point to a historic opportunity to reimagine the role of the modern workplace. So in order to help you prepare for what's next, we've put together a set of actionable insights along with some really practical solutions to serve as thought starters to not only get the gears turning within your own organizations, but for those of you in A&D practice with your clients. Again, this is a really collaborative process of people coming together to draw from our lived experiences over the past couple of years, draw from what we know about the relationship between human behavior and the built environment, and create places that are better for people. So in this introduction, I'm going to go through and explore some of the ways in which our relationship with work and workplace has changed and why we don't think it's going to go back to the way it was before. In the discovery section, we'll take a look at some of the latest data from our research partners at Future Forum and other folks that we respect to help you discover where you are on your own journey and supporting new ways of working. And then I'll share some illustrations, some actual visuals of ways to think about new ways to think about space in order to create some better experiences for people based on their expectations. All right. So organizations everywhere have been reevaluating their places of work, and assumptions of the past, that office work has to be done in an office and that employees can't be productive or collaborate effectively while working remotely have really been shown to not be true. So early in 2020, millions of office workers around the globe had to make an abrupt transition to working from home. And while they were able to stay productive, other aspects of their work experience suffered a little bit. In our business, for sure, we saw a huge retail boom in the sales of home office furniture, and that was resulting from an attempt to alleviate one of those kind of pain points, and that was the lack of access to ergonomic tools that were traditionally just provided in the office. But not all workers have the means or the space to outfit a home office with a sit-to-stand desk or an ergonomic task chair. So that support is something that is still important to accommodate within a workplace. We have seen several organizations make statements along the lines of, oh, we're going to get rid of all the individual space and we're just going to make collaborative space within the office. Definitely think that that would be a mistake because not all people are coming from the same context. One of the other points that was strained was this idea of what social scientists refer to as weak ties. And so these are the connection points, not with your immediate team, but with other teams or folks that you don't see on a more regular basis. We've actually seen data that says that strong ties, those connections between your direct manager, your immediate working team, are actually stronger and more healthy than they may have ever been. And a lot of that is attributed to the direct connection that we've had over video over this time, getting to see glimpses into other people's lives and learning a little bit more about them that we might not have had access to previously. But those weak ties are really becoming a really stretched point that is a pretty high risk for organizations. So one example that I might highlight is that when you think about a time when you were back in the office and you would see a colleague from a different team and it would spark an idea about a project that you had that might have relevance to them, and that drives a conversation. You may still have those thoughts while working remotely, but what's the likelihood that you're actually going to pick up the phone and call that person or take the time to type those thoughts out in a message and send it off to them? There's a barrier to communication that starts to present itself with that distance that just doesn't exist if you happen to bump into them in the workplace. So that importance of weak ties is something that we're really starting to focus on more and more. And here's a stat from an organization called BetterUp. It's a virtual coaching and mentorship platform. And through some research that they've done, they've seen that people with low social connection are 70% more likely to feel burnout than people with high social connection. Burnout is something that we see as being a significant and increasing problem with global talent these days. And this notion of really focusing in on having a healthy network of weak ties to increase that social connection within an organization goes a long way to mitigate the effects of burnout. And furthermore, within BetterUp's research, one of the things that I found that was most interesting is that burnout is not so much caused by the volume of work, but more so the perception of control over that work and the support network that you have. So those weak ties, those social connections that help you feel more invested in that community. So in this section, I'm going to highlight some data from Future Forum. MillerKnoll is a founding partner of that group, along with Slack, Boston Consulting Group, and Management Leadership for Tomorrow. Future Forum was started to build this kind of cross-industry consortium focused on what a new type of work experience might be like. And this was really envisioned to be far more than just a think tank exercise. It was intended to be biased towards action. And one of the main ways that that's achieved is by conducting a quarterly pulse survey. So once every 3 months, between 10 and 11,000 desk-based workers respond to this survey across 6 different countries to really get a sense and keep a finger on the pulse of the shifting expectations that people have about their work experience and the best way to support that. So from that data, um, we have some stats here that I wanted to highlight with you. And one other thing that I want to dive into before getting into those numbers is to address, really early in this talk, the term hybrid. It gets used a lot these days. And it's kind of like the term collaboration of, a few years ago. It's this huge overarching term that points to a tremendous amount of variety. And it becomes really important to come up with a definition or a common understanding of what that means within your own organization, within your culture. So rather than focusing in on hybrid, I'm going to opt to use the term flexible, which I think is just more accurately reflecting what people expect from their work experience and what they're looking for going forward. So to that question, these stats on the slide, we can see that 80% of the employees surveyed as part of that Future Forum Pulse survey want flexibility in where they work. An astounding 94% want flexibility in when. And those same survey respondents self-reported 29% higher productivity and 53% greater ability to focus when they have full schedule flexibility. So this is a huge benefit to people in giving them more autonomy around their workload. So back to that idea of burnout, flexibility is also something that can be really helpful to help mitigate that by giving people control over how and when they get their work done. So at this moment, I would ask you to just kind of think to yourself within your own organization, what does flexible work mean? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to your company in terms of shaping your overall work experience? So the trends in the data are really easy to identify. The percentage of employees who want to return to the office full-time continues to shrink, while the percentage of employees who favor a flexible schedule, here that's defined as coming into the office 3 days or less a week, continues to grow. And as conditions in workplaces continue to improve around the world, we're also seeing the percentage of fully remote workers decline as well. There was lots of anecdotes, even within organizations that consider themselves to be fully remote, 100% remote. All of them, I've yet to find one that will not acknowledge the importance of a face-to-face connection on some regular cadence. And then they immediately back that up with saying there needs to be a lot of intentionality around those face-to-face interactions. And that intentionality is not only around when they come together as a group, but what they'll be doing and how to best configure that environment once they get there. So with this slide, what I really wanted to drill down on is that flexibility is arranged. You can address flexibility in a way that respects the working population within your organization and find the right balance. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing proposition. So yes, the desire for flexibility is really high. We wanted to look at a couple other data points here to understand first what motivates people to come into the office. And with these stats, you can see that by far the driver is for collaboration, camaraderie, that in-person, face-to-face interaction is what's really key. But 16% of employees out of that Pulse survey are also looking for a quiet space to get work done. This is something that was really reinforced by some research that MillerKnoll just recently completed on the evolution of home life over the last 2 years. So with that study, we went virtually into about 100 different households across 6 different countries. And the insights that we gained were pretty profound, not only for shifts in people's home lives, but for looking at working from home as a dynamic that really expands the overall ecosystem of work. What we learned across those 100 so households is that there are a range of factors that impact what sort of support an individual might want or need from a workplace, a centralized workplace or an office to serve as a counterpoint to spaces that they may have in working from home. And some of those conditions were things like the family makeup, the stage of the life stage of the household, in terms of, are they just starting out? Are they pretty well established? Are they approaching later stages in life? Things like families that are living in multi-generational households where they have multiple generations living in the same space. If people are caregivers, so all of these things that lead to other demands on an individual's time, that they really want to invest in, that they really want to engage in because it brings value to their life. And so understanding that is really key when you're looking to what sort of support individuals might want when they come into an office, whether that's a place to really physically, visually, and acoustically isolate from others, or having the ability to connect remotely with people that they're providing care for or seeking care from. So some of those ideas show up in this data as well. So in addition to wanting to understand what was driving people to the office, we wanted to understand what was keeping people away from the office. This was a much smaller survey, and it was one that we did just a couple weeks ago, or excuse me, a couple months ago, just within the US, just under 1,000 knowledge workers. And we wanted to see what was presenting itself as a barrier to coming in. Commute was at the top of the list. I've seen other stats on this idea that basically put a line in the sand at about 30 minutes. So less than a 30-minute commute. There wasn't a huge impact on whether or not someone would decide to come in. More than 30 minutes, there was a significant drop off. So if you've got folks that are commuting more than 30 minutes to come into the workplace, you've really got to make that destination worth it when they get there. This is something that when you look long term, really needs to be taken into consideration when you're looking at things like location strategy, where you're going to build new facilities. So distance of commute for your talent is really key, but other things fit into that as well around what sort of neighborhood amenities might be available within that surrounding area. Well-being was pretty much tied at that top mark, and this was really around individual well-being. So I think over the last couple of years, we've all been given pause to reevaluate our own personal value systems and realized that we've really got to take it upon ourselves to care for our own individual well-being. And that if we don't do that, there's no way that we can care for others around us or be fully contributing members of the communities that we seek to be part of. So really protecting and supporting that individual well-being is something that's really key. And we'll see that a little bit later in the talk today with some visuals highlighting some new types of spaces that can really help support a broad range of individual well-being activities. Um, Schedule was another thing that prevented people from coming in. Too many video meetings. It's back to that notion of when I was saying that fully remote organizations acknowledge the importance of coming together in person, but that they put a lot of intentionality into planning for those in-person interactions, starting to see a lot more intention being focused on just interaction in general, posing questions around when do we need to meet face to face? When do we need to meet synchronously or live versus asynchronously? And how do we use new tools that are at our disposal to share the information that we need to share in a way that kind of respects each individual's context? Caregiving was another one that was really important. People aren't really willing to let this go lightly, and this is a great thing. This is a great thing for individuals, for families, for communities at large, when we look beyond ourselves and really start to strengthen stronger bonds at a family and kind of community level. Design of the office did show up on the list, but it wasn't near the top. My personal belief here is that the office is kind of being caught up in this moment and being used as a point of leverage. I think for most organizations, what really needs to be focused on is the employer-employee relationship. And I think employees that are not satisfied with that relationship are using the office as a leverage point to create dialogue around that relationship. And one of the key ways that organizations can help kind of bridge the divide there is to show respect for people by gathering their input about their work experience and then reflecting that input in the spaces that are created to support them. All right, so this is moving into a new section of the talk. And so when it comes to approaching any sort of flexible approach to workplace, it's really important to create places that matter to your people. And this is what we mean when we talk about places that matter. At MillerKnoll, we do not determine the value of a place. That value is determined by the people who use it. So to help places deliver on their potential, we've synthesized the research and expertise from Herman Miller, Knoll, and our broader collective of brands into 4 place design principles. Not only do these principles draw upon the insight gained over decades, but they also guide our exploration now and into the future. And we can use these principles as a guide for engaging people to uncover insight and envision new experiences of work. So um, as we go through these next 3 slides, I would encourage you to think when it comes to your work or the work within your organization, what matters most to people? What are the things that are most critical? Is it a sense of stability and consistency? Is it access to the latest cutting edge tools? Something that feels very fashionable, something that feels very comfortable? What are the things that really drive value for work within your organization? So the next few slides, I'm going to introduce each of the 4 principles with a general description and then share a specific insight about how it relates to place design. The first principle is places that matter start with people. How and even why we design places today is different than it was 10, 5, or even 2 years ago. Yet this fundamental principle remains true. Places that matter start with people. Understanding how people perceive the world is a prerequisite for creating places that matter. And that's because everything valuable about a place, its beauty, its function, its feeling, is conferred by the people in it. And just because human experience is subjective, that doesn't mean it can't be explained, understood, and recognized as a source of meaning. A key insight here is that people show up simultaneously as individuals, members of groups, and representatives of larger communities. As they move throughout their day, different interactions at the individual, group, and community level will take precedent depending on what needs to be done. And these variable roles that people fill will have an impact on what they value most in a place, whether that's being able to gracefully host others, if you're kind of representing a community kind of a role, or facilitating dialogue in a group setting, or if you're just trying to effectively tune out distractions as an individual. Depending on which role you're inhabiting at any moment of time is going to set your priorities around what kind of space is going to be most beneficial to you. So when you think about how people show up in your workplace now, what level of interaction is most important to support at that individual, group, or community level? Are you seeing a need for supporting individual focus, a need to strengthen those weak ties at the community level? Which area is approaching the red or in the red and needs the most kind of TLC at this moment? The second principle is places that matter strengthen community. Place is more valuable when it facilitates the relationships that help us generate value for our families, our organizations, and the communities in which we live and work. That's how places that matter strengthen community. Our activities connect us to one another, both directly and indirectly. And because place has an inherent ability to support or inhibit what we do within it, we can shape places to strengthen connection by facilitating the activities that bring people together physically, emotionally, purposefully, and otherwise. Now, admittedly, trying to anticipate all of the things that people will do can be a daunting, if not impossible, task. However, we can plan for activity based on the general nature of interactions between people and their work. And there are 2 broad types of interactions sought by individuals, groups, and communities. One is aimed at producing a tangible outcome or a specific result, while the other prioritizes open exchange and reflection upon ideas, information, and feelings. The first type of interaction tends to rely on task-oriented postures and environments that are fine-tuned for performance. And then the second prioritizes more relaxed postures and emotionally evocative spaces. So when you consider the interactions that matter most within your organization, which type do you think is most important to support now versus maybe further down the line in the future? That really kind of task-oriented production, tangible output type function, or something that's more on the softer side around facilitating more of those kind of social interactions. The third principle is places that matter feel inclusive and personal. Place is a reflection of people, both the fundamental things that make us all human and the unique things that make us, well, us. This is why places that matter feel inclusive and personal. The expression of a place should be based upon the unique cultures, communities, and individuals for whom it was designed. Rather than expecting people to conform to a uniform typology of place, places that matter express what is both authentic and aspirational for people. They consider the widest range of human ability and experience through inclusive design while delivering an equitable experience for everyone. And the best way to achieve this is to engage the people who will use the space as part of the design process. There's a shift here in moving beyond kind of the great development of universal design in the evolution of design process, moving towards inclusive design. And this is a shift in thinking and action of designing for people to designing with people. So generally speaking, we can see that communities need to socialize, groups need to collaborate, and individuals need to focus. Um, but the best support for those interactions will vary from person to person, from team to team, and company to company. And a great way to meet those diverse needs is to include a purposeful variety of settings directly informed by people's needs. So, in other words, once you identify that need for community socialization, how do you start to drill into the precise way that's going to feel most natural for that community to socialize? Conversely, you can do the same thing when you look at the need for an individual to cultivate focus. So within your own organizations, when you think about the specific ways that people want to come together, what are some of the characteristics that come to mind that might shape the way that you do something that would be different than another organization or another team? The fourth principle is places that matter get better over time. The value we derive from a place fluctuates based on a range of factors, from our emotional connection to it to its ability to adapt to new uses. Place is never static, but places that matter get better over time. Place is constantly evolving, and whether that evolution is to the benefit or detriment to the people who use it requires deliberate action. When we create places that matter, we invest time, thought, energy, and emotion, as well as capital, into their continuous improvement, granting them the resilience to adapt to new people and patterns of use. A place's ability to improve is largely determined by intentional and strategic investment in its creation. And here, investment doesn't necessarily mean spending a lot of money on furniture. It can mean dedicating appropriate time to consider what's most important, putting a plan in place for experimentation and learning about new approaches to place, or simply making sure that you're right-sizing the monetary spend for the challenge at hand. I like to think of this principle in these two lenses of there's the image on the screen of the person who's physically changing the shape of that environment. So that place is continuing to provide value by giving them the ability to flex that space and to change to meet a new function. But another way that places can get better over time is through um, uh, accruing emotion or memories through repeated use, or a bit of a patina, if you will. So one of the stories that I like to tell is like if you had a grandparent who had a favorite lounge chair in which they told you stories and you sat at their feet as they shared those stories with you, and you inherit that chair later down the road and you tell your kids stories, there's this extension, this connection back to those stories that you heard as a kid. And so they carry this additional emotional weight. So making sure that we're investing certain aspects of design to be timeless, to age well, to really be sustainable for the long run is a really key thing. So there's a mix here in making decisions around designing for longevity and designing for flexibility. Where's the foundation and where's the flex? So when it comes to thinking about improving the value of your own place, what sort of things come to mind in this light? Okay, this is the final section of the slides today, but I wanted to build on some of those fundamental principles that help guide our thinking around the relationship between behavior and the built environment and use them to look forward to new ways of working and the new types of experiences that people are expecting within their workplace. So first, we looked at the types of interactions that largely went under supported while people were working from home. And we reimagined the modern workplace as an on-demand destination for employees who are seeking out specific experiences that are difficult to replicate at home or elsewhere. And I should acknowledge that previously, many of the best workplaces were designed for activity-based work. And that's still a really useful approach, but we're seeing a subtle shift here with an increased focus on the value of relationships and experiences at work. So with that evolution in mind, we've developed a new typology of spaces to streamline the process of identifying desired experiences and to help visualize options for real support. The typology builds on some of the insights I've just shared through those place design principles, and the space types are grouped by the primary level of personal interaction to be supported. So are we looking at actions at an individual level, interactions at a group or community level? And then the other dimension is looking at the predominant nature of those interactions to be supported, whether people are seeking to produce a tangible outcome or whether they're seeking to exchange and reflect upon ideas and results of their work. So the visualizations that follow are, of course, just thought starters, and they are just one example of a broad array of many types of settings that would fall under each of these functions. And I'll highlight a few of those as we go along, but it's really important for people to work with design partners to refine ideas into real places. So what we're doing here is essentially moving from general functionality to then identify the specific way that that function would play out that reflects the nature of the people and the communities that they're serving to identifying a real solution that can actually be built in the real world and people can occupy. When we look at these categories of space types, I'm going to present side by side those two different flavors of interaction, if you will, looking at the community level, focusing in on spaces for socialization and spaces for assembly, at the group level, spaces for meeting and spaces for collaboration, and at the individual level, spaces for restoration and spaces for focus. So let's take a look at them side by side. So at the community level, we're looking at spaces that support informal social interactions where people from different groups can assemble and work alongside each other and help build community. So if you receive an invitation for kind of a community gathering within your organization and you find the location and you show up at one of these images or the other, which one do you think is most likely to have an agenda associated with it? It's pretty easy to identify. The one on the right, the way that it's designed and articulated, already sets the mind in motion that we're here to get something done. There's an agenda, we're going to move through specific points, and there's likely going to be some sort of an outcome. The one on the left is much more open-ended. So on that second place design principle about strengthening community and that one being all about activity, this is where that one really starts to come to light around saying, yes, communities need to come together, but they need to come together for different reasons. So creating categories of space for community level interaction that are either geared towards producing some sort of an outcome or more open-ended social exchange is pretty important. So the community socialization space visualized on the left There are other examples of environments that would fall within this category as well. Some of them could be smaller lounge type environments, or cafe settings. And here we see a much larger plaza type environment, that allows for many different groups to gather and come from different perspectives. There are some really important inclusive design considerations that are taking place within this one as well. When you look at things like the open, clear floor area, seating with and without arms, and a variety of places to locate yourself, whether that's right in the center where you're going to see and be seen, or whether you're going to tuck along the periphery and find a spot that has some sort of partial shielding that gives you an ability to kind of take a pulse, kind of get a sense of what's happening within the group if you're a little more apprehensive about diving in. This image on the right, I will highlight, based on all of our interactions with customers around the globe. This is a type of space that we've seen quite a few organizations target for a pilot project. This is a really easy way to take a corner of an open office floor area, maybe where you've got some workstations that are underutilized, um, take those out, put them in storage, and implement a kit of furnishings similar to this that can be set up with, 3 or 4 pre-configured setups. And that allows people within an organization or like on a facilities team to meet with team leads and say, hey, what are you trying to achieve? We can provide this environment and set it up in a speaker audience setup, maybe if you're introducing a new strategy, or it can be reconfigured to create breakout spaces if your strategy is already clear and you're wanting to mobilize different teams, or it could even be set up in more of a social type vibe. But this is a great way to start building more intentional dialogue about the relationship between people and place, and how you can use place as a tool to strengthen the ties within your community. When we look at groups at work, that same kind of two-sided dynamic occurs where you've got the dynamic of producing things and getting things done, or exchanging information. So on the right-hand side, this team-based neighborhood is the new version of what would have looked like multi-pack workstations in the past. So 6 packs, 8 packs, 12 packs, lots of individual workstations linked together. There's been a big shift here in the thinking on this. If I'm sitting in an 8 pack workstation, my desk is physically connected to the desks of 7 other people. Yet many organizations will count those seats as individual space. There's a bit of a disconnect there because when you show up and you see that those 8 desks connected together, that is first and foremost a group-based setting. That doesn't mean that you can't get individual work done there, but it's first and foremost serving that connection to those 7 other people. So when we look at spaces with more intentionality, we want to look at who's being served first. And in this case, we want to serve group collaboration. So shifting from that 8 pack kind of multi-pack workstation mentality for group space to something that's more like this group team neighborhood is a big shift that we're seeing in that regard. On the left-hand side, this group meeting space, this space for exchange and of information, there's also been a shift here. Previously, this environment would have looked like a very traditional conference room, big rectangular table with a bunch of chairs around the perimeter. But in this space, that table has been effectively broken apart into individual tables for each seat. Each one is given an adjustable chair and the ability to kind of create their own little micro environment. And this is another great opportunity to pilot a new type of space and build dialogue about the relationship between place and people. In this moment, we're seeing a lot of organizations experiment with dynamics between connecting co-located groups, co-located people with remote participants. And a lot of that is happening through Zoom and Teams, and many organizations are really enjoying each individual having their own video tile and access to chat and access to files. And so this type of physical environment gives us a way to have a group of co-located folks connecting with remote participants and having more of an equitable experience. But the environment is very flexible so that it can be reconfigured in many different ways, and even including things like having this kind of cubby off to the right-hand side where you can tuck those individual tables when they're not being put in use, when that room's being used for another function. So this is a very kind of low risk, low investment intervention that can be made to start to introduce some new working dynamics within the work experience. The last category of settings that I want to highlight within the workplace are those for individual work. So if you remember on the slide where I showed the barrier to coming into the office, individual well-being was very high on the list. Part of that is, I think, many people's individual experience previously, pre-pandemic in the office, was not very good in terms of providing support for individual well-being. Most organizations, and this is a really sad realization, the only place for an individual to go if they were having a moment of distress to recollect their thoughts was the toilet. I mean, surely we can do better than that, than expecting people to go to a bathroom stall to have a moment to take a deep breath and recenter. So, just like I was mentioning on the previous slide around the group spaces, that kind of 8 pack of workstations is first and foremost serving the group. We need to make sure that our workplaces have spots that are readily identifiable as serving the individual first. And that doesn't mean always creating a cellular private office or an enclosed phone booth. There are many other ways that you can address this. So the image on the right is the one that I would identify as that kind of productive individual space. And the image on the left is an example of more of that kind of restorative reflection individual space. So on the right, we essentially have this study hall environment that supports being alone together with other people. And within that, this provides a broad range of places to support different types of individual focus. It also really supports the dynamic of learning within an organization and celebrates that to allow you to learn side by side along with others in your organization. Within this space, we can see in the center these kind of more kind of traditional study carrel type setups that come from academia. On the left, we have more like visually shielded environments with a view to nature. Towards the back, that kind of library table dynamic, as well as more lounge-oriented postures. So within this, there's a broad range of ways that individuals can cultivate focus. This type of environment is another one that we're seeing many organizations choose to pilot in underutilized areas of their floor. And this is something that's actually really beneficial for organizations that have a few folks that are coming in really regularly, but you may have an individual sitting by themselves in a corner of the floor that's just surrounded by empty workstations. And then in the other corner of the floor, there may be another person who's sitting there. And those folks are often coming in because they're some of the ones that had difficulty finding focus at home. When you create an environment like this, you all of a sudden create this opportunity to start building some critical mass within that organization and kind of rekindling some dynamics and momentum around people coming together, both around the newness of this type of space, but also in a way that allows the organization to show that they really care for and respect the well-being of the individual. The space on the left, this one is not intended to be a productive, quote unquote, productive working space. This is a moment for temporary respite. So you've just had a really intense call, or you've got one coming up, a moment to take a breath and recenter. There aren't laptop tables here, there aren't connections to power. This is really intended to be a place to unplug. And it's important for organizations to not only provide these spaces, but encourage the importance of their use and encourage people to actually utilize them and take it upon themselves to care for their own well-being. So introducing environments like this really starts to greatly increase the amount of support that can be provided for a broad range of individual needs. There's another setting type that's really important within the broader ecosystem of work, and it won't exist within any corporate office, and that's because it exists at home. And so this is something that we're seeing really being with us for the long haul, and seeing organizations find ways to extend that support that they can offer to their employees within the home working environment. Okay, I'm going to click off some next steps really quick here, and then that'll give us just about just under 15 minutes for a little Q&A on some of these high-level ideas that I've introduced. In order to get started in envisioning a new approach to place design, the most important thing to do is to engage your people in dialogue about their work experience. If you're not doing that, your chances of success are greatly diminished. It's important to have data and real dialogue about the real work experience of people to better inform the variety of spaces that you're going to need to implement within your environment. And that can be done in a range of ways. It can be done through surveys, it can be done through focus groups. Employee resource groups is something that we're seeing as a way to capture the perspective of kind of different cohorts within an organization and helps manage the complexity of gathering input from so many different perspectives. Again, that idea of designing with as opposed to designing for. Once you collect that feedback, then use that to inform forward-looking workplace strategies. Previously, we saw a lot of organizations building personas, worker personas, and a lot of times those were really tightly correlated with job role. We're starting to see some of that persona development incorporate other things. Like, for instance, is the person a long-distance commuter? Is the person a caregiver within their family unit? Those sorts of important context clues really start to inform what sort of support that individual would need when they show up to the office, more so than just a straight job description. And then lastly, once you start to make some of those connections between what people want and what they expect and how the environment can respond, test them. And do that with intention. When you begin that pilot project, make sure that you know how you're going to measure success beyond utilization. How does the use of that environment actually impact business performance or other outcomes that the organization wants to see? And so building that measurement in upfront becomes really critical. Those are the slides that I've prepared to share with you today. And now I'd love to open up dialogue for any questions that you may have based on the ideas that were presented.
Sure. Joseph, we've got a few questions here in chat. I think some people are looking to maybe unpack some of the information. One of the first questions was when you were talking about the survey and what matters most to bring people back into the office. There was a question around breakdown by age, and Stephen did share the Future Forum Pulse report with the group, and I know that you mentioned or discussed life stages impacting that, and just wondering if there's anything else you would elaborate on from an age or life stage perspective.
Yeah, definitely. There's something really important to focus on here. And the distinction is an over reliance or overly focusing on, quote unquote, generations in the workplace. Um, a lot of times we can be like, oh, what does Gen Z want? Previously it was like all about how the millennials were destroying the work experience in the workplace with their kind of whiny expectations. Well, that dialogue has shifted. Now there's much more focus on Gen Z and what their expectations are. And that can be a bit of a false path to focus too much on age. But there is a real cohort effect that's important to identify. And so I mentioned earlier, like through employee resource groups, there are ways to identify like-minded individuals that are coming from a similar perspective. And so some of those things that are more impactful in designing for the work experience are things like tenure within the organization. Is this a new employee or someone who's been with the firm for maybe decades in some cases? Um, Complexity of job. How many different tasks is someone doing? That's a huge indicator on the level of flexibility or variety of support that someone might need. And so starting to group people according to some of these more meaningful factors aside from just age, because when you group by age, you can kind of miss the point. But there are indeed real identifiable cohorts within an organization that start to speak to similarity of experience of broader groups. And that's where that engaging people in dialogue becomes really important to start to tease out what those things are. One other thing that I'll say on this point is that we're at this huge turning point on so many of our previous norms within workplace design. And one of the keys here that I'm really excited about is a shift away from external benchmarking to benchmarking against yourself. And so when you begin that process of engaging people in dialogue about their work experience, you have an opportunity to set baseline data for your organization. And that means that you can start to shape the future that you want for your organization rather than trying to emulate what someone else has done for their organization.
Perfect. Okay, the next question is, do you have any data that breaks down individual contributors versus people leaders? With a comment, within our company, we find pretty drastic differences in sentiments when sliced this way.
Yeah, for sure. And if you follow that link, let's see who posted that. The Stephen Kalaki posted in the chat to the Future Forum Pulse report. This most recent one in particular focuses in on that kind of people manager level. Those folks are super stressed right now. They are caught at a pinch point between executive leadership expectation and individual contributor expectation. And those folks that are people managers are really getting crushed. And part of the reason why is that there are all these new work tools that are being implemented. Those moments that I highlighted earlier around the importance of having dialogue and making decisions around what information are we going to share synchronously versus asynchronously? When are we going to show up in person versus when are we going to connect remotely? Those middle managers are the ones that are really being carrying the brunt of the weight of navigating those decisions in addition to this elevation of focus on individual well-being and expectations. One of the most helpful pieces of guidance that I could offer to those folks is to recenter these conversations on the origin of the relationship between those individual contributors and the company in the first place. If you rewind to the first day of that person's job when the organization posted a job opening and that person raised their hand and said, "Hey, I can do that better than anyone else you're talking to. Hire me. I want to do it. I can be successful." If you frame those conversations in terms of what's necessary to be successful for that job that you were excited to do, that helps remove some of the emotion from some of these other considerations. Those other things are still really important, but address first and foremost the conditions that are necessary for that individual to be successful. And in doing that, you start to build the trust that's necessary to navigate some of those other expectations. But yes, that report will have some more data on that working set individual there on people managers in particular. I mean,
And Joseph, I think you may have just covered this next question, but I'll see if you want to expand on it. And the question is, do you have research that explains how to determine individual preferences in organizations?
so sorry, I was just like trying to think about how to answer that question.
Sure.
Um, yes, we do. So, I mean, there are a broad range of ways to do this. One is there's some research that our Herman Miller brand conducted a couple of years ago on individual states of mind. And this was something that was really key to start to give individuals vocabulary around how to articulate what support looks like for them in terms of cultivating focus. And it identified this broad range of 5 different kind of individual states of mind that exist on this spectrum from high concentration to low concentration. And within that, you can start to get a sense of folks that have a high degree of job complexity versus low job complexity. That's another metric to look at. How many different types of tasks an individual might be doing is a way to get into it. One of the other areas that I think is really promising and exciting from an inclusive design standpoint is looking at sensory engagement. This is often kind of, I'll try to use my words carefully here, hyped up in the media around like designing for neurodiversity. I love that neurodiversity is coming into the conversation. That's critically important. But at a higher level, what that's really looking at is differences in processing sensory information. So, for instance, people that have a vision impairment or a hearing impairment, that's a difference in processing sensory information that wouldn't be included in the kind of neurodiverse spectrum, but it's dealing with a lot of the same drivers. Like, for instance, someone who may be on the autism spectrum that is highly sensitive to busy patterns within an environment. So, when we start looking at things like designing for sensory engagement and the research that comes from environmental psychology, we can start to get more tactical information around individual preference for place design that starts to correlate back to the way that the brain functions. So there are a broad range of studies and resources that we can use to help qualify individual preference.
Yeah, perfect. And there are just a couple of meaningful comments in the chat that I just thought I would share. One is that in some cases it is important to mix age, especially when people are working in the same field, teaching each age group different skills and approach to the same task. And I do think that's meaningful. And then building on that, Jordan comments, I do think comparing age versus life stage is a really interesting idea to example. Many people in my age category have families, but I don't. So my priorities are quite different.
100%. That's like a spot on insight for that point.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Well, in the interest of time, Joseph, I would like to thank you very much for sharing this information and for the audience who participated. For looking forward for design perspectives, we are going to take a holiday break in December. I know we have We Care events with many of you and our dealers across the country the month of December, but we will be back in January, as Joseph mentioned at the beginning of the call. He's going to build on this information, and we will get those invitations out to you. We ask you all to reconnect with us in January and invite your colleagues. So again, Joseph, thank you very much. We will see you in January, and thank you to our audience. Have a happy holiday season, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.